The introduction that we've been giving everyone is, the way this all came together was quite interesting, and I'll give you guys some background about that since I know that part of the story really isn't in the white paper or any of the materials, but you know, uh, Alex, who's the CEO, and myself have been really close friends with Andrew Masanto for over a decade now. And, we originally, our backgrounds were in banking and his was in law. And we all met around the same time about 10 years ago, when we were leaving those fields into trying to go into something more entrepreneurial. We went in the direction of e-commerce. He went in the direction of digital marketing. And it wasn't until 2017 where, out of the blue, he messaged me and Alex and he said, "Hey, do you have a PayPal account? And if you do, can you buy this interesting thing called Ethereum for me?" And at the time, March 2017, I think Ether was maybe $20. And that was actually the first time that we stepped into crypto. It was 6 months after that where he found the Challenger consensus mechanism to Bitcoin, which ended up becoming Hashgraph. And I remember watching him say that, this technology that underpinned Hashgraph was quite interesting. And he asked the founders of the technology if they'd ever considered turning it into a public ledger, and they hadn't. He asked them if they wanted to, and they said sure. And then, 6 months after that, they raised $100 million at a $6 billion valuation. 4 years later, I think Hashgraph sits around 10 billion in market cap right now. So it was really interesting because, after that, we all kind of took a break. We were early investors in Hashgraph and early supporters. But during the COVID lockdown in 2020, Andrew reached out to us again and he said, "Hey, I think the crypto markets are coming back because of all this infrastructure that's been built over the last couple of years. And if they do come back, it's going to be bigger than anything we've ever seen because of everything that's been built." And he asked me and Alex if we were interested in joining him on the adventure of building yet another project. He broke the top 30 with Hashgraph. He broke the top 100 with Reserve. And I know it was always a dream of his to break the top 10, top 15. And so we said yes. And over the course of 2021, last year, we spent the entire year basically incubating different projects, looking for either interesting technologies or entrepreneurs that could be the next big thing. And one of those projects ended up becoming this thing that we call Nillion. And it was this interesting, at the time, it was this strange identity slash privacy technology that these two guys had come up with. It wasn't really a crypto project per se, but it had some implications. And we went and met with the guys in Belgium, the inventor, the chief scientist, brilliant guy. If you guys have seen the Cambridge University talk that he did, that's Miguel. And in short, Miguel's got 30 patents under his name. He was one of the early pioneers of figuring out how to send data packets over internet fiber optic cables in the 90s. He did that work for Siemens and Nokia. And in 2017, he got really fascinated by blockchain and wanted to have the same kind of impact on Web3 that he had on Web2. But so he created this interesting technology, and we all went and met with him in Belgium for the course of a weekend. And about 8 hours into it, we had this oh shit moment where we realized that, he wasn't a crypto guy per se, but so he didn't realize the extent of the technology that he had created. And I don't think he realized that if you had taken the technology that Miguel had created and you had overlaid it onto a decentralized ecosystem, the implications of it were massive. They were huge. And so we came out of that meeting, and I remember very clearly at the time we were incubating 5 projects. We dropped the other 4, and we made a decision to pour everything into Nillion. And so that was the moment where we all kind of came together. And the initial founding team was, we had Andrew Basanto, who was coming in as the chief strategist. We had Alex, who took on the CEO role. I took on the CMO role, Chief Marketing Officer. We had Miguel as the chief scientist and the inventor. And then we had Rob Leslie as the president. And so we started quietly and humbly building Nillion last summer. And so, what Nillion is I like to describe it as we call it the secure processing layer of Web3. That's the title of the white paper. And that's a lot to unpack, but effectively, I think what would lead these questions really, really well is if you think about blockchain and consensus and everything that's happening now and over the last 5 years, it's really interesting because all of that started from theoretical foundations in the 80s. And if you look back into that core body of material, it's really, really fascinating because, material that's been building for decades is finally getting a chance to come into reality. And that's the case for blockchain. It's the case for pretty much everything in Web3 that we're seeing now. But if we look at blockchain specifically, blockchains were originally meant to create a public ledger, right? And if we look at the original blockchain, Bitcoin, that was exactly what it did. It solved for everything you would need to be able to have a public ledger. And so, for instance, it gave you the ability to have immutable storage across multiple computers in a network, first of all. But then it also solved for being able to collectively figure out the order of a transaction, but then also the value of the transaction. And by doing those three things, we were able to run a public ledger across a decentralized network. Now, that decentralized network and that public ledger was never meant for computation. It was never built for computing. And we know this because, if we look at what happened since, right? A few years after that, Vitalik came along with Ethereum, and he figured out a way that with a quote unquote smart contract, how to bolt on computational power onto this public ledger, onto this blockchain. But still, it was never meant for computing. And a good example is if I want to send you something on Ethereum, or let's say you're running some kind of decentralized computation, say you're taking out a loan on Aave, or you're buying an NFT, or you're signing a transaction, or whatever it is, you see these very weird 1980s remnants that are still showing up today in the computing power, right? Depending on the block space and the gas and the congestion at the time, that transaction or that computation can take either 30 seconds or on a bad day can take upwards of 3 hours. And so it all comes back to the point that these public ledgers, these blockchains, were never built for computation. Now, Nillion is really interesting because the thing that Miguel figured out, Dr. Miguel de Vega figured out, was he figured out a way to stand up a public network that was completely built for computation. And so much so that it only focused on the value of something, but not the order of it. And so when you look at something like Nillion, this secure processing layer, it's actually not built to run a public ledger. It's not built to run a ledger at all. You can bolt on the ability to make it run a ledger in the same way that you could bolt on computational power to a blockchain, but the purpose design of it was meant for computation. And so in many ways, it's kind of the inverse of a blockchain, right? In this case, you have something that is purpose-built for computing as opposed to being used for a ledger. Now, this is really interesting because if you look at a network with decentralized nodes that can run decentralized computations at very, very fast speeds, it's interesting because you can take that network and you can connect it to a blockchain. You can connect it to an Ethereum, a Solana, or whatever. And not only do you assist and supercharge that blockchain into doing things that it couldn't do as well to make those blockchains do things better, but you also open up this entirely new design space where you allow these existing blockchains to do things that they previously couldn't do. And so, things like that are, for instance, you allow them to connect to other blockchains, which is interoperability. You allow them to process computations very, very fast in this almost like quote unquote off-chain environment, which is scalability. You allow them to do private data, or you allow, say, something like Ethereum to hold on to private data. And so you allow things like private smart contracts. You open up a world where you can have private NFTs. You open up a world where you can effectively run very, very fast decentralized computations. Now, it's interesting because on top of that, you also stand up a network that independently turns out to be the safest place to store something. When you take data or information and you break it up into decentralized pieces. So for instance, if I take a private key or a private metadata or any kind of data, and I break it up into, say, 100 different pieces, and I give each piece to a node on a network, which is exactly what Nillion does. Turns out when you store information that way, it's the safest way to store information in the world currently. So much so it reaches this standard, which we call, quote unquote, information theoretic secure. Now, it's not a standard that we created. It's one that's been around for decades, but it simply means that the information stored in that manner, and we call it ITS, which is information theoretic secure. Information stored in ITS is stored in a way where even if you had unlimited time, unlimited computing power, and even a quantum computer, you simply wouldn't have enough information to effectively uncover whatever that information was that you stored. And so what we have here is we have a network that can store information, private information, insanely securely, so much so that we say that it renders encryption obsolete, right? But on top of that, you have this network that can connect to other blockchains, other layer ones, that can make those networks better, faster, stronger, more efficient, but it also doubles the design space of the things that they can do. Now, the third piece of the puzzle, which is why Nillion is so interesting, is because if you take Nillion and you stand up the network and it works, the off Web3 use cases are just astounding, right? Imagine a world where you can have everyone uploading their healthcare records onto something like Nillion, and at the same time, able to run queries or run studies on that data without anyone ever being compromised for their data. Imagine a world where you can run things like decentralized KYC, where someone can prove that they are not a terrorist, that they're over 21, but they don't actually have to tell the institution who they are. And so imagine being able to run KYC for even something like Uniswap, right, without telling Uniswap who you are, right? But imagine being able to run a network where you have decentralized identities without ever needing to prove who you are. The use cases start to get pretty fascinating when we go into the limit with this thing. And so, because of that, the technology's been really interesting, but over the last year, we've been quietly building up a team and commercializing it and building up the right community. We've done this a few times before, and so we know the things that need to happen, right? Community first and foremost. It's always community first. Beyond that, you have to have the right kind of narrative, the right positioning. You have to take interesting technology and commercialize it so that it actually has great use cases. And then all of the quirky things that come with building a crypto project, having a good Twitter presence, having a good Discord, and everything that comes from there. I think because of the caliber of the team, we've actually been able to bring on some really, really fascinating team members, and I'll be able to share more about that with you guys over the course of this AMA. But, we've had some great conversations with great either VCs or founders or just people in tech, and I wanted to effectively give the community a chance to have the same kind of conversation. And so the last 10, 15 minutes has been the exact same conversation that I've been giving to various different, I would say high-level players within crypto. And so I think that was a great way to kick this AMA off. And then from here, happy to take this conversation in whatever direction you guys want to take it through the questions that you guys have. And we're going to be having these somewhat regularly with different star people on our team. And so this will be the first of quite a few AMAs that we do as we continue to build Nillion and to make it more public. So with that said, I will turn it over to Charlie. And Charlie, feel free to start feeding me questions. Feel free to start bringing people up directly on stage, and I can just talk to them directly. And I think this will be a great conversation. Really looking forward to this. And like I said, the community is everything to us. And so we love doing stuff like this.
Yeah, no, that was incredible, an absolutely amazing breakdown of Nillion. It answered a lot of the questions that I've already been asked, but we do have two people that are requesting to speak, so I'm just going to bring them up on stage so they can ask their question to you in person. So I'm going to invite Tabachi up on stage now because he's requested it, and he'll be able to, or she will be able to ask their question. You're up on the stage, do you have your question for Andrew?
Hi guys, thank you for having me here, and I just found out about your projects, about your project. A few people just noticed that to me. And briefly, I'm just the decentralized executive officer of HBAR Suite, which is the first smart contract less DeFi DEX that we're building and bring it to the Hedera network ecosystem. So we're building on top of Hedera. And it sounds really exciting for what you guys are doing, and very interesting also in regards of the fact that you're relying like some kind of a cross-chain interoperability. And my first question that I was thinking about, so basically, long story short, besides giving people like the security by kind of emulating this multi-sig environment, but just like getting pieces of a key between different computers, are you basically lending computational power, and is it the way that you provide like extra speed, almost like the Lightning Network would do with Bitcoin?
That's a great question, and we actually have a lot of Hedera supporters, and I think that makes sense considering Andrew Masanto was one of the guys that started Hashgraph. But you do touch on a great point because, you know, at its core, Nillion is a computing layer, and it brings decentralized computations to life. Now, in doing so, in standing up the network, it also ends up being this place where by having a network with, say, many different nodes that can hold on to and run computations for different information, by holding on to the information, it also ends up being the most secure place to store something. And so if you look at the white paper in section 5, we broke it down into 3 phases. And the first phase is we just stand up the network. And in doing so, you end up with this very secure enclave to store information in a very decentralized way. And so that would be the most similar to something like a multi-sig. You know, if you look at the really famous iterations of technologies like Fireblocks, which they do decentralized, sorry, not decentralized, but they do institutional custody for crypto. Massive company. I think they just got valued at $8 billion in valuation. But the advancement in the technology was based off of what they are using. And so much so that it created a brand new technology altogether. But in its first phase, we end up with this world where, yes, you can store things very securely, things like a private key, but it really gets interesting in that second phase where you start to be able to run decentralized and private, if you want, computations of this data that you're holding. And so, you know, when you reach that world of computation, you know, what does that actually mean, right? And so, you know, what's a decentralized computation allow for things to happen? It allows for things, like you said, you know, interoperability, right? If you have a standalone network that can connect to every other network and can run Turing-complete computations at commercially viable speeds, that is exactly what allows for interoperability, right? It also allows for things like private smart contracts. It allows for things like off-chain computations. You know, it's really interesting. You know, we cited this at the start of the white paper, but, you know, Vitalik himself has said that, you know, there will be a world where there's computational load that is needed. And, you know, there is a future where things like the original blockchains just become the settlement layers, whereas the heavier computations are being done on different networks or quote unquote off-chain in more efficient ways, and then settled onto these layer 1 networks. And so, you know, it's very important to note that Nillion is not a layer 1 and it's not trying to be a layer 1. Rather, it's a computational layer that enhances other layer 1s, but then also can do some pretty interesting things on its own. Like you said, storing things in a very, very secure way.
Absolutely amazing.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, thank you very much for your answer. And another thing that I wanted to ask, actually a couple more things, if you don't mind, was so basically, by being a computational layer, does it entail that you guys would have a certain computing power that comes from non-renewable sources, so that would basically entail like some certain carbon onsets and offsets that you are going to like provide in terms of like pollution, so to speak, or have you thought about anything related to the matter, if that would like kind of put the computational power into a place where the more you scale, the more users you have, the more energy you will consume, and therefore this would either come from renewable or non-renewable sources.
Yeah, that's a great question within itself, and it's very much a blockchain question. You know what you're describing. the reason that blockchains, quote unquote, are, I would say, stigmatized as being energy heavy is because of the original blockchain, which was Bitcoin, proof of work. Right, proof of work is the enemy of basically power. But the reason proof of work needed to exist was because they needed to solve for the order and the value of transactions because they were running a public ledger. I think when you look at something like Nillion, it's not a blockchain and it's not trying to solve for a ledger. And so it doesn't need to use proof of work. And it doesn't actually use consensus in the same way. If you think about how blockchains typically have to work, you basically have every node running all of the computations wholly, completely, and then they then compare all of the wholly completed computations side by side to see who had consensus, right? What is the overall correct answer? Now, that's very tricky because you've effectively multiplied the computational load as if you were doing it centrally by hundreds, if not thousands of times, depending how many nodes are running your computation in parallel. Whereas with something like Nillion, it's interesting because instead of running multiple computations wholly across many different nodes, you have one whole computation being split up into, say, 1,000 different pieces, and then you have 1,000 different nodes running 1/1000th of that computation, and then bringing the decentralized computation together to create one piece. And because of that, there's no redundancy or heavy redundancy that leads to a heavy energy suck, right? And that's actually the first time that we've actually seen something like this done, where we are actually truly decentralizing the computation down to the actual computation. And because of that, and because there's no consensus in the way that a blockchain works, we don't actually run into those energy problems. If anything, we actually make computation more efficient, right? And the other thing that's really interesting is, imagine you've broken down a computation into, say, 1,000 pieces. Each node does 1/1000th of that piece. Within the technology is also a way where when the pieces come together to create the answer, the quote-unquote consensus actually happens on a computation basis locally for each computer. And so that by the time that the answer does come together, we have already the assurance that it is in fact the correct answer. That in itself is a rabbit hole within itself.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the questions. Especially, we're going to just move you back into the audience now as we've got some more questions wanting to be answered. But thank you very much.
Guys. Thank you.
Yep.
So now we're going to bring up Haynes at 264 to invite to speak. So if you just like to join on, you can then ask your question.
Okay, hi guys, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Cool. Yeah, so I heard about Nillion about, say, a week or two ago, and I am a medical doctor in South Africa, so I'm not that into the entire world of crypto tech yet, but obviously want to diversify and learn quite a lot, and I did a little bit of IT in school. It's always been a passion of mine. So question is, you already named one of the possible use cases now for Nillion being, patient data in the medical field. And honestly, in the current setup of the medical field, if I just take South Africa as an example, that is one of our biggest, shall I say, hurdles to overcome is adequate, safe, secure patient data management. There's basically no effective systems in place. There's no effective programming in place. Most of the places, especially we're obviously still a third world country, but it's very difficult to actually effectively and securely manage patients' data. So how will you guys, so social engineering generally is one of the main ways, or the main way how, for example, crypto hacks happen. For example, the Ronin hack that we saw quite recently, where the private keys for 4 or 5 nodes are obtained, and they obviously got into the system with that. And medical data being so ridiculously private, needing so much security, will Nillion be able to be user-friendly enough as well as secure enough, and have any ways of essentially trying to overcome the challenge of social engineering? Because if something is going to be deployed to such a massive industry, already standing industry, obviously there's quite a lot of people that's going to have to input the data, and social engineering is so easy. If you look at the amount of hackers and the amount of scammers that we already have only on the Telegram channels these days, it's so easy to get private data from people. Is there going to be any way that Nillion tries to, then obviously the system itself is very secure, but is there any way that Nillion is going to be able to kind of prevent or make it more difficult for people to do the entire social engineering thing? Yeah.
Great. That's a really great question. And the reason that we were so interested, if you think back to that meeting we had in Belgium, the reason we were so interested in Nillion and that we dropped every other project to really build it was because the scope for Nillion is massive. Like, it's huge. Like, it's truly, truly big. But beyond that, there seemed to be a very, very clear step-by-step path that would lead to even the biggest of visions. And so, like I said, in section 5 of the white paper, we have broken it down into 3 phases. And from the way that we see it, is the initial use cases are the ones that they have more margin for error. And so what I mean by that is, if you're enabling, say, a private smart contract, or you're enabling better computation, faster scaling, more interoperability, that is generally more forgiving than, say, if you had all of the medical records of South Africa, right, onto your network. That is on the other end of that is very, very risky. But I think there have been many, many projects that have tried to be a digital identity solution, that have tried to be a healthcare record solution, and they've all failed, right? They've failed miserably. And I think the reason for that is because those are industries that are so archaic, they're so old, they're so heavy, they're so big, they're so bureaucratic that you can't take them head on. There's no way you can take them head on. And so those are almost plays where you get so big and so integrated into the world where when those things come into the forefront, and they will, you naturally become the solution for them. And so, a good example would be Amazon, right? If you had tried to take on all of retail head on, in 2000, whenever they started, you would have failed. But if you started with books, and then you moved on to diapers, and then you moved on to something else, and then you eventually moved on to processing, AWS, and then you moved on to e-commerce at large, then suddenly you have taken over half of the world. I think the same thing's going to happen with Nillion here, where initially we have some very, very fascinating use cases that are badly needed within Web3, within the world of blockchains and crypto and etc. And Nillion will be a very interesting solution to a lot of those problems, but then also it opens up the design space massively, right? Because if the design space has been built for ledgers and now you open it up to be built for computation, you've effectively really opened up the possibility of what can be built in this world. And I think once any of those use cases fall over, like I said, if interoperability falls over, or scalability falls over, or private contracts fall over, or decentralized fireblocks falls over, you have a multi-deca-billion-dollar project at your hands. And as those fall over, then you start to become a much more reasonable competitor or entrant for something like healthcare records and etc. Now, interestingly, if the network is big enough to the point where you can take on healthcare records, digital identities, and whatever else, it will be big and scaled enough where being able to social engineer it or being able to hack it becomes very, very difficult. It would be the equivalent of trying to social engineer your way into taking down, say, Ethereum or taking down Bitcoin, which at that point would be quite hard. But even before we get to that point, right, and that would be the inflection point where we do take on something like healthcare records, even before that point, I would say the engineering that is going into Nillion itself makes it so that it is incredibly difficult to even social engineer your way into breaking the network even early on. It's a security network, right? And it is doing to basically data what a multi-sig would be doing to a private key, but in a much, much more extensive and enhanced way. And so even to assemble any piece of, let's say you stored something like a private key or stored an arbitrary piece of data onto Nillion, In order to be able to, in order for someone to be able to hack, quote unquote, hack that information, they would not only need to be able to hack, say, one of the full nodes on the network, but they would also need to be able to find the other nodes that are holding, say, the other 99 pieces of that data, and they would need to hack them as well. But they wouldn't know which of those other 99 full nodes are holding the other 99 pieces of data. Say you have a network of 1,000 nodes, and I said, go find 100 different pieces, and if you find the right 100 different pieces, you'll be able to reconstruct the data for Charlie. But then, say you go to one node, and you try to reconstruct the data, because it's information theoretic secure, even if you guess the right thing, the node still doesn't tell you if you have the right answer. And so you can guess everything in the universe, and even if you guess the right thing, you wouldn't know. But even if, let's say you did, right? Let's say somehow you did, and you did know, you would have to do that for the other 99 nodes that are holding onto that same piece of information. Now, the thing is, you don't know which other 99 nodes are holding on the piece of information. And so not only do you not know what the other nodes are, but then when you do, if you do stumble across the right node, which you won't know, there's no indication that you found the right one, you would not be able to know the piece of information that he's holding as well. And so you're faced with then a series of basically essentially impossible tasks before you can reconstruct even the most simple piece of information. And this is what I mean by information theoretic secure. You just don't have enough information to be able to uncover whatever it is that you're looking for. Now, if you look at something like, say, Ronin, that's a different scenario, right? Because for Ronin, they did have enough information. They knew that there were 5 nodes, and they knew that if they compromised 4 of them, they'd be able to do whatever they wanted to do with the network. And so that is a non-information theoretic secure way of storing something, which is, I would say, a different kind of scenario. Now, of course, you do have the gun to the head scenario, right? Let's say you had Charlie stored his information in Nillion, and you went to Charlie's house and you put a gun to Charlie's head and you say, Charlie, either you get me the information or I kill you. In that case, then yes, you could hack, that is social engineering 10 out of 10, but maybe not even then, because information you store into Nillion can be stored with authentication across multiple people. So you can put a gun to Charlie's head, but Charlie can say, hey, even if I submit all my authentication to give access to this piece of information, you actually need to do the same thing for Andrew Masanto and Alex Page and Andrew Yeoh, because they are multi-authenticated MFA, right? Multi-factor authentication to this piece of information. And so when you start storing and authenticating information in that way, even if you hit the gun to Charlie's head, you still wouldn't get the information. And unfortunately for Charlie, that might not end so well for Charlie, but your data is very, very safe. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, actually, that's 100%. Thank you so much. I actually had another question about the entire secure storage of data, but I mean, you answered everything very clearly, so I really appreciate that. And yeah, very much looking forward to this project. I mean, again, as I said, only in the medical world, if you guys are able to deliver this thing, which I really have zero doubt. I'm also very much a lover of data. I love what you guys have done with the tech there. But I mean, if you're able to deliver this type of product, it is honestly, as you said, multi-billion-dollar game changing. If you can just get this type of tech into the mainstream system, obviously only starting on the blockchains and then working your way up from there. But yeah, I'm really excited, and thank you for answering everything so thoroughly.
Great. And you work in medicine, and so you're very fascinated by the medical use cases. And I think what makes Nillion so interesting is you have a project where that excitement you're feeling for medicine, we have seen that excitement across, I would say, 50 plus different use cases. Either people within crypto, people next to crypto, people alongside it, and everyone shares the excitement, and they're saying the same thing. If this works for this thing that I really love, it's game changing. And I think when you have a project that can do that on so many different things, that's what got all of us so excited to begin with. But yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a lovely night and look forward to the rest of the AMA.
Yes.
Amazing. We've got a bunch of questions now rolling in. We've got one from Vasily and one from Captain Brando. So we'll go with Vasily first, so we'll invite you up on stage to talk, and then on to Captain Brand after that. Just roll it in now.
Hi folks, I hope you can hear me.
Hey, what's up, man?
Indeed.
Hey, yeah, my name is Eamon. You know, I just heard about Nillion a few weeks ago, and I read the white paper, and I've been super impressed so far. It was a bit of a head spin moment for me, really. You know, I first learned about Bitcoin and the idea of immutable, uncensorable network a few years ago, and then smart contracts. You know, that you can do distributed computation, Ethereum and Ripple, Codius. Then, I think another head spin moment for me was learning about the hash graph algorithm. You know, huge hash graph a fan. You know, it's really, really impressive technology. And now again, just a few weeks ago, just Nillion and its ITS secure computation network. You know, really, really impressive. So, I'm looking forward to the more detailed paper coming online so I can read that. So, I had two quick questions. The first question was, when is the SDK going to be available, and is there going to be a test net for us to, start getting our hands on this technology and start building things? And the second question, right now, I presume I can only run multiplications and additions. So, it's not general purpose computations, I presume. So, is there going to be kind of more information about the DSL and how we can actually write these secure programs for the Nillion network?
Okay, wonderful. Sounds like you are a builder. Are you technical?
Yeah, I've got an IT background. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I will bring you to the edge. I can get pretty technical, but I'm not technical myself. But I can give you the roadmap of what's happening. And so, we are on a technical hiring spree right now, and really bringing on a all-star team of engineers to really work to stand all this up. And so I would say over the course of the upcoming year, we're actually all meeting in Amsterdam in 2 weeks with the tech team and the product team. But we're really going to be road mapping and building out that initial infrastructure layer, as well as the ability to authenticate into the network, since that is kind of the gateway into everything and all things Nillion. Alongside that, we're going to be building out those initial use cases with our founding entrepreneurs. They will affect also the way that the infrastructure is built out for the network. This is very similar to what was done with Mirror and Anchor with regards to Terra, Luna. And then I would say probably sometime towards the end of the year, that's where we'll start standing up the test net, inviting people to start testing it with us. After that will be the main net, and I would say alongside with the main net would be the SDK to start building things out. In terms of the computations, so Nillion will be Turing complete in its computational ability. The breakthrough was being able to do multiplications in a decentralized fashion at a very, very fast, commercially viable way, along with additions. And it is meant to be general purpose compute. And so when everything is stood up and it is running all its computational power and it's all unleashed, expect to have a Turing complete computational machine that can run these decentralized computations. Really interesting and, community first, right? And so happy to share this with you guys first. I know there's 55 people here. I'm sure more people will be listening to this, and it's already starting to get through the grapevine. But I just mentioned this is a gnarly technical project with a very, very intense technical build, which is all kicking off in about a couple weeks. And I can say the CTO that we have that has come on board to do this and to really build what is probably going to be one of the more technical projects of crypto and of 2022 is a guy named Conrad Whelan. And if the name sounds familiar, it's because Conrad was the founding engineer for Uber. It was him, Travis, and Garrett that basically built Uber in the first 5 years. He read the white paper, was so blown away by the technology that he reached out and has come and joined us full time as our founding CTO. And so he's the one leading the hiring charge, building this entire thing out. And the reason we're meeting in Amsterdam is because that's actually where he lives. And so we'll be building out the team around him. But all that's happening in the next months and year.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I hope you have a great time in Amsterdam in 2 weeks' time. It's a great city. And thank you for answering my question. Yeah, so really looking forward to hearing a bit more about the turn complete nature of the Nillion network and the types of instructions that we can run. So sounds really exciting.
Yes, and we're going to be releasing some quite a flurry of documentation over the year, where there's going to be a technical white paper, which, crazy enough, the one we released was not the technical one, but there will be a technical one with the mathematics and how everything's proved out. There will be engineering papers, and I will say we've learned a lot from Hashgraph. We've learned a lot from Reserve, the other project that Andrew was part of, and the one of the core things that is so important for, I know, Conrad, speaking on his behalf, was that this needs to be stupid easy for developers to come and build on top of. Because if it's difficult, no one's going to use it. And the lifeblood of this is great developers that are building great applications on top of this. And so I would say, it is very much a core pillar of us, a principle for us to make this as joyful and easy and as fun to use for any developer that wants to look at this stuff.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep. All right, next up.
Amazing. So we've got Captain Brando now up to speak. We just invited him up on stage. He's a very active member of our community, so we're excited.
All right.
Hey guys, I appreciate you guys doing this, and I'm really enjoying all the questions and answers you guys are giving. It's very helpful. I have a two-part question. I'll try to be quick. Just curious, since you guys aren't a layer one, I know you're planning on launching an ERC20 token at some point this year. I'm just curious how that plays into Nillion and the infrastructure. And then the second part of that is, as far as the logistics of you guys' nodes, who will be running your nodes, how many nodes will there be, et cetera. And I'll listen quietly. Thank you.
Okay, that's a good question. So with regards to the token, this is very much in line with what we quoted from Vitalik. It's actually in the first paragraph of our white paper. And we're bringing to life the vision of Nillion being this computational layer, whereas a blockchain, therefore, is then the settlement layer. And so that's exactly what we're doing with this case. And so Ethereum is going to be, in many ways, kind of the quote-unquote the settlement layer in terms of the fact that it allows us to have a token, which allows us to power this amazing token incentive system for the different nodes and to financially incentivize different people to be part of the network, either as users or providers of computation. And it also gives us a very fascinating way to build community and to build the network within itself. We're going to be releasing some great information about this, but the tokenomics and token incentive system that we've created it's truly remarkable. It's a combination of everything from Terra to Ethereum to Helium, and when we release this, it's going to be quite interesting because it's very much tied into allowing community members to basically take part in this network and the token upside. So that's the reason for using Ethereum and having their token and how it kind of integrates with the Nillion computation. And like I said, right, we're not trying to be a layer one, which is why we could have a token on Nillion. We could just bring it and do it natively, but that kind of defeats the purpose. And if we're trying to be a network that is integrating into all the other blockchains, it made very much a lot of sense to have an ERC20 token alongside us. Now, with regards to the nodes will actually be on our network, and they're the ones holding the private data, running the computations, etc. And so the nodes are broken up into two categories. You have light nodes, which are responsible for holding all of the data. So for instance, if Charlie, I keep picking on Charlie, but if Charlie stores his private key or some kind of information into Nillion, the light nodes are the ones that are going to be holding on to that protected information. And then there are what we call the full nodes. And the full nodes also hold that information, but in addition to that, they hold what we call the blinding factors. And think of this as the very special keys that allow Charlie's data to effectively be fragmented into hundreds and thousands of different pieces. Those are the keys that basically keep Charlie's data fragmented into many decentralized pieces. And so those are being run by the full nodes. And so how many nodes do we want? Many. We would take as many as we can. And how do we incentivize many nodes, qualified nodes to come on board? With that, we're drawing from, we're drawing from different kind of health score systems, similar to the reputation systems you would see in something like Chainlink. Also, an amalgamation of what you see in proof of stake from something you would see like in Ethereum, in addition to some of our own kind of creativities and incentive mechanisms. But our belief is that if you incentivize nodes in the right way, you build the right kind of community, you build the right kind of project, that you end up with a situation, kind of what we're seeing with VCs and community right now, where you just start getting great people approaching you. It's that old saying, right? If you, I'm going to butcher this, but I'll try and do it off the top of my head. If you have a good product, then you don't really need great marketing. If you have a good, but then also if you have good things around that, you don't actually need marketing as well. If you have good community, you don't need marketing, right? And so it's kind of similar thing with the nodes. If it's a good project, it's good technology, and everything is standing up in the right way, then I think we won't have a difficult time getting those nodes. That's what I'm saying.
Sure, I appreciate that, guys. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we're nearing towards the end of our hour now, and we've still got 3 people in the queue to talk, so I'm just going to invite you up to talk and ask you questions, and I'll just move you back into the audience, just so Andrew has enough time to answer you guys all your questions, because we know that's important. So I'm just going to invite you up one at a time, ask you a question, and I'll just move you straight back into the audience. Thank you very much. Just invite Wookie up to talk now, and he can ask his question. Are you there, friend? He says you're in here.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
We can do. You've deafened yourself, my friend. On the bottom by your name, if you just hit the microphone or the headset, it'll undeafen you. There you go.
Charlie, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I can indeed.
Okay, sorry. Had to adjust Discord. Real quick. So in any case, so I'm not a technical person in my day job. I'm a doctor also, like the previous caller. And I've been in privacy in crypto for a while. I just really wanted to ask, so from my rudimentary understanding, Nillion solves the blockchain trilemma issue. And I think this was hinted at in one of the videos. What I wanted to ask is if you could elaborate more on that. And then, as I understand Nillion, right, it's feature enhancing for other layer ones. So will they by default inherit the privacy? And also, and I don't know how this will work, if they will also have the blockchain trilemma issue solved for them. That's my questions. Thanks.
That's a really good question. And we have, there's so many narratives within crypto. And there's a lot of tribalism as well. And I think we have kind of tried to stay away from the narrative of we've solved the blockchain trilemma. And the reason for that is we don't want to come out swinging and being like, hey, we're better than blockchains. We've solved the problem that you guys can't solve, etc. And so rather than taking on that and starting a war where there really isn't a war, we're not trying to fight anyone. We've just kind of come out and basically said, hey, we've figured out a way where we can enable privacy, we can enable scalability, and we can also enable accuracy, right? Integrity. And if we found a solution that we can address those 3 things in a pretty innovative way. And we think that innovative way can bring a lot of value to different blockchain communities and crypto at large and Web3 and off Web3. And we haven't really labeled it, right? We haven't said that we've solved anything that blockchains can't solve, etc. We're here to help everyone out. And so that's kind of been our stance on the quote unquote trilemma thing. But I would say the more interesting question is what you said with the privacy thing. And yes, Nillion brings privacy features to existing blockchains and allows them to have a private enclave where they can store private data. Imagine a world where you can have public data on private blockchains, and that's a world where Nillion has come and enabled your public Ethereum to do that, and enabled something like a private NFT launch or a private NFT collection, etc. And we looked into this intensely at the beginning because originally when we looked at the technology, the lowest hanging fruit was to turn this into a privacy network. But the more that we dug into it, and we talked to every founder from every privacy network you can think of, from if not the founder, then people on the tech team or people working for them, etc. Everyone from Mina to Secrets to Zcash to Monero to the tornadoes that we see, the tumblers that we see, Aztec. The list is endless. And the takeaway that we had was that if communities were willing to migrate to layer one privacy blockchains in the name of privacy, then Zcash and Monero would be a top 10 coin. And I think what we've seen over the last 3 to 4 years is that they aren't. Privacy is important to people, but they won't sacrifice everything at the altar of privacy for that. There's a reason why you don't use Signal as your de facto messaging app, most of you. I don't, at least. I use it when I need to, but not as a de facto thing. And it's because I would say community and those other aspects really come first, community and convenience. And so it was really important for us to create a network where we could respect that and bring privacy features to existing communities. For instance, imagine you were on Ethereum and you like using Uniswap, you like using Aave, you don't want to migrate to random blockchain XYZ/privacy in order to be able to have your Uniswap transactions be private, or to have your wallet be private, or to send something privately, or to compute something privately. We wanted to be able to create a world where you didn't have to leave Ethereum. And I think with Nillion, we have, right? We give privacy features to anyone, any network that needs to use them. So rather than privacy by default, we have privacy as a service or privacy as a feature, which interestingly is exactly the narrative that Multicoin took in 2019. They basically said, we don't really think privacy by default is going to be the thing. We think it's going to be privacy as a feature. There just hasn't been great solutions, right? Secret's a layer one privacy, layer one by default. Mina is a layer one by default. Zcash is layer one by default. So is Monero. And have you guys moved to Monero? Have you guys moved to Zcash to do all your transactions? Probably not, right? And so that's kind of how Nillion tackles the privacy thing. Nillion is not a privacy project, as easy as it could be for us to have built that. Rather, it's a computational layer that has privacy as a feature if you want it. And I'd say that's an important distinction and a good one.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So many of the questions that were in the tech chat have been fully answered. Just as you've been answering other questions, it's been really good. We have time for one more question. So I'm just going to bring one more person up to the stage and they can ask their question. So I'll bring Ben up onto the stage if they're still here and they can ask their question to you. So I've just invited you up. There you go.
Hear me?
Yes. Hey, Ben.
And you're saying good stuff. It's I'm just new, just kind of read the white paper a week ago, and you actually kind of answered my question there. So I was just reading today about the EU pushing more towards KYC for non-custodial wallets and whatnot, and the question was really around privacy, and you kind of answered it. I just want if you foresee major risks to a network like Nillion delivering what it kind of potentially can in the face of pretty restrictive regulations that seem to be going down the line. But you actually gave a fairly good there in the previous question.
Yeah, and this is, like I said, when we talked to the medical guy, I was like, Nillion is spine-chillingly exciting for people in medicine because of the potential future healthcare implications, and it's even interesting for people in KYC and privacy and things like that, and regulation, because when we were starting to work on this in stealth last year, KYC was not that interesting, but we knew it was going to be an important thing. And now it's become almost like a sexy topic. Not sexy per se, but rather it's a very pressing topic. Now, with something like Nillion, and this is actually probably going to be one of the early use cases that we build out, is with something like Nillion, you can have a KYC where you don't actually give over your identity information to the person you're KYCing for. So for instance, imagine Uniswap connects to something like Nillion, and Nillion's, say, KYC service built out by one of the founding entrepreneurs. And let's say you're able to submit your KYC information through Nillion in fragmented form, and Nillion can just connect to Uniswap and confirm on your behalf that A, you are someone that lives in, say, South Korea, you're over the age of 18, you're not a terrorist, you haven't done anything illegal, and that these things are assured to be true. And then Uniswap says, okay, this is someone that's qualified to use our network, but then it doesn't know your name, doesn't know that you're from South Korea, doesn't know that your age or that you're over 18 or what you do for a living, but then the box is still able to be checked. That is how I see KYC working in Web3 and in the future. And honestly, that's how KYC should work in Web2. It's just that there's no way of facilitating for that to happen. If a solution can get created where that happens, that checks all the boxes that all the regulators want without needing the regulators to come up with their own solution. Because if the regulators come up with their own solution, I can guarantee it's not going to be that, and it's not going to be nearly as friendly. And so, I think Nillion is poised to create a solution that kind of keeps everyone happy while still not sacrificing the ethos of Web3 and the decentralized nature of Web3. And I think that's really, really interesting. Funny enough, one of the Rob and Miguel, the co-founders, their previous background was in privacy and digital identity. So they are very poised to create that use case internally. But we'll probably rely on one of our founding entrepreneurs that we are recruiting for that.
Amazing. And that is the final question. So I'd just like to thank you on behalf of our community for taking the time out to answer all of these questions. I know a lot of the questions that have been asked have been answered, and I've had a myriad of messages come through saying how amazing this has been and how useful this has been. And from our side internally, I'm sure you'll agree that it's interesting to hear from the community to see what they're thinking about Nillion and all the use cases that they're thinking of and how they're approaching the amazing white paper that you've just released.
Yeah, exactly. And, I've had enough of these conversations with literally the who's who of crypto venture capital and other co-founders. And I know, it's usually around this mark, the hour mark, where we've kind of given them the spiel. They've asked some questions where we realized we could talk about this for hours. We can keep talking about this, and it would only get more and more interesting. I understand that that's where I'm leaving you guys off at, but we have thought about this very carefully, and this is not a one-off AMA. We will be having these conversations with you guys very, very regularly, and so just think about this as part one, where we can keep rolling this conversation and fairly regularly, either I'll come back or someone else from the founding team will come back, and we'll continue just having these conversations with you guys because, we are not lost to the fact that community is literally everything in Web3 and everything for Nillion. And so as amazing as the technology is, as amazing as our connections are to, say, the higher tiers of crypto, it all comes down to conversations like this that actually make the difference. And so we haven't lost sight of that. Community is the thing we talk about the most in our internal calls. We'll continually build out the community for you guys. We're releasing some crazy, really interesting things for the community. For the guys that are going to be watching this replay, you'll have seen the calendar invite for my next call, which is for what we were calling hoodie socks, as an homage to the Uniswap Unisock. And so we have something very, very fascinating planned out for you guys with that, along with some other things. There might be an NFT Genesis key coming out as well. And so just keep your eyes peeled for as this project continues to unveil itself into the public. And I'm sure I will be on another AMA with you guys in the near future. And so thanks for your interest. Thanks for coming out. This was a lot of fun for me. I love this. I love talking to you guys and being really, really grassroots with this. And so with that said, I got to get to the next call, but I will see you guys very soon, and I'll see you guys in the Discord and the Telegram. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for everyone in the community and all of your time to come and chill with us for this hour and to listen to all of Andrew's amazing answers. We've had people literally say it's been giving them chills, and Andrew leaving it on such a cliffhanger with our hoodie socks and NFT little leak is just, a great way to bring you back next time. So we'll get one of these set up again soon. Thank you to Andrew, and thank you to all the community for being here. And we're going to call this an end now. So take care, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day. And you too.
Okay.
Take care, guys.
Bye, guys.